Hi everyone, this is Daryl and welcome back to Book Odyssey. Today I'm going to be reviewing the hard sci-fi novel Schild's Ladder by Greg Egan. Schild's Ladder is the hard sci-fi masterwork of Australian author Greg Egan. Since its publication in 2002, it has often been labelled as the hardest science fiction novel ever written. Set 20,000 years into the future, it begins with an experiment in quantum physics that leads to a cataclysm on a universal scale. An enormous, rapidly expanding vacuum called the nova vacuum is created that consumes everything it comes in contact with. The humans that have scattered to live among the stars must confront this deadly expansion as it devours whole worlds. If it isn't stopped, the entire universe will eventually be engulfed. Chaikea, aboard the starship trawling the border of the nova vacuum, has allied himself with the Yielders, those determined to study the nova vacuum while allowing it to grow unchecked. They believe the growing vacuum is just part of an ever-changing universe. But when his childhood love, Mariama, re-enters his life on the side of the preservationists, those who are working to halt and destroy the vacuum, Chaikea finds himself struggling with an inner turmoil he hasn't known since childhood. However, in the centre of the vacuum, something is developing that neither Chaikea and the Yielders, nor Mariama and the preservationists could ever have imagined possible: life. The concepts in Schild's Ladder I have no choice but to divide into those I could fully understand and those I couldn't, because Schild's Ladder is hard sci-fi like no other hard sci-fi I've read. In fact, the science part of the sci-fi was so hard I came away bruised. It's probably the hardest sci-fi I've ever read, and by hard here I mean both in terms of being hard sci-fi genre and the fact that it's difficult and mind-expanding. Obviously I mean these to be compliments, to a point. This might have something to do with the fact that Egan is a mathematician and has produced record-breaking research on supermutations. Schild's Ladder takes its name from Schild's ladder, which is a construction in differential geometry devised by the mathematician and physicist Alfred Schild. Throughout the concepts of the book, Egan extrapolates cutting-edge quantum physics and consciousness theory to create radical new versions of a post-human future, pulling in imaginary physics a step ahead of the physics that we know today. The pinnacle of this physics is centred around the nova vacuum, which in itself is not only a fascinating concept, but also forces a number of fascinating effects within the politics of this future humanity. The nova vacuum is a rapidly expanding sphere of altered space-time that is over 600 light years across by the time the story gets going. Its surface is very bright but not hot at all, and is only a few Planck lengths thick. Beneath that lies what is technically a whole other universe, where the rules are so incomprehensibly different to the physics of our own universe that mass and energy as we think of them don't even exist. There are no constant physics, and reality consists of Planck scale patches of different physical laws. So this is about the level of it that I could understand, and I'm not afraid to say large portions of everything else went over my head. As I said, this expanding nova vacuum not only impacts the space and worlds that the scattered humanity inhabits, but it also affects the political landscape until two groups form, the Yielders and the preservationists. The preservationists obviously want to halt the expansion of the nova vacuum, which has engulfed inhabited worlds, while the Yielders believe that the nova vacuum should be allowed to expand and that it should be studied. The Yielders generally believe that humanity, which has advanced to the degree of transhumanism, has become stale and insular, and that the nova vacuum has the potential to reinvigorate their stagnated growth by forcing them to adapt. This stagnation is the result of a period of advancement in humanity which has propelled people towards transhuman status, where they have developed sophisticated technologies able to greatly enhance longevity and cognitive abilities. You could also argue that the people in Schild's Ladder are also post-human, given that most of the characters are biologically gender neutral. However, this isn't because of any evolutionary process, it's because most of the characters exist as software and were created as such, having never been in actual physical bodies. That's right, a large portion of humanity live as digital entities in a software reality and have no bodies, meaning also there is no death. I know, mind blown. When they re-enter real time, downloading into clones, they run on quasps rather than brains, as does everyone, even those born into physical bodies. As I read Schild's Ladder, I assumed quasps were some kind of cortical implant designed to act as a brain would while in physical reality. This is never really explained, but on doing my research for this video, I found that you have to read Egan's short story, Singleton, to understand more about quasps and why they matter, so I will leave a link to that short story in the description for those who are interested. Interestingly, there's also another short story of Egan's set within the Schild's Ladder universe called Transition Dreams, which explores the idea that the process of constructing a brain must create unrememberable experiences. In Schild's Ladder, people regularly make backup copies of themselves, but generally only run one at a time. So when someone who lives in real time dies a local death, they can be restored from the latest backup. Transport over great distances is generally accomplished by the transmitting of the contents of your mind and having it downloaded into a new body. I enjoyed the characters in Schild's Ladder, and I think it's important to state here that Egan makes them fully realised, three-dimensional, with quirks, flaws and passions. A lot of the hard sci-fi tends to see all this stuff as secondary to the very concept-driven story, but I didn't interpret that in Schild's Ladder. In fact, a lot of what I really loved about this story comes from the interactions between the characters, and how this was affected by the strangeness of their lives, and of humanity that far flung into the future. Chaikeya is the protagonist, and he is a yielder who wants to research and learn from the Nova Vacuum. Mariama, who was Chaikeya's first love growing up, is a preservationist. We get to follow their reunion after years of not seeing one another, and also experience a few flashbacks when they were younger, which really delves into the motives of their actions. I really appreciated this characterisation from Egan, and to be honest, I wasn't really expecting this type of sensitivity toward the subject he was exploring. The human elements of the story held everything together, which I loved, and I found during these parts I couldn't put the book down. I found myself caring about their relationship and the tension that forms between them because of their opposing political views. I also want to say here that I think having the protagonist as a yielder, the arguably more controversial of the two sides, was a gutsy move from Egan, because it means the reader has to actively try to understand his reasoning and motives from a logical and unemotional point of view. This runs the risk of alienating the reader from Chaikeya if they really can't understand him. If Chaikeya had been written to be on the side of the preservationists, however, it would have been easier for the reader to understand his motives. I mean, it's simply empathy, right? Nova Vacuum expansion equals bad, right? I'm glad Egan didn't simplify it in this way and made us work to understand the characters. So as I said earlier, this is probably the most difficult book I've read in any fiction genre. Actually, it is the most difficult, and it's my first Greg Egan book. It's up there with the hard sci-fi of Paul Anderson and its mind-expanding qualities, but like when I read Paul Anderson, I don't always understand the science or mathematics that is being described. However, for the most part, this didn't detract from the bulk of the story, but I'd be lying if I said I understood everything, especially towards the end, which becomes dense. I went away wondering whether Egan's intention was to overwhelm the reader a bit at the end, or if he actually thought the everyday sci-fi reader would follow it. But then I thought, maybe this isn't one for the everyday sci-fi reader, and I can accept that. I do have to say that while a lot of the physics evaded me, reading through it did add to my overall experience of the book, and it's certainly one I will read again, maybe soon, because I pretty much think I need to absorb more of what happened. But I kind of like this. If I go away from a book and I think to myself, I enjoyed that, but I doubt I'll ever feel the need to read it again, then maybe that's not a good thing. The fact that it blew my mind to pulpy smithereens can only be a good thing. After all, it's when we're outside our comfort zones that we begin to grow, and I personally read for more complex reasons than just to enjoy what I'm reading. Okay, so I'm going to be sharing a few more thoughts next, but these go a little heavier into spoiler land, and I talk about the ending. If you don't want to watch this, you can skip ahead to the time at the bottom of the screen now to get my final thoughts and my star rating. I think Egan took pity on the average reader toward the end a little bit, As I said earlier, it gets dense with science and concepts, but I have a feeling that Egan could have made it more complex than it already was. When Chaikeya and Mariama eventually venture into the nova vacuum, the interface they use presents it for their and our benefit as outlandish yet still comprehensible realm, when in fact there is no light, matter or energy in there at all. Everything is millions of times smaller than atoms, and the only reason Chaikeya and Mariama can enter it at all is because they have programmed themselves as a type of quantum graph software vehicle analog that is represented as a submarine. Despite this being, for Egan I'm sure, a way of depicting this universe in a way most people can comprehend, with physical shapes and mass and colour, etc., it was still a bit, To give you another example, many of the life forms within the nova vacuum are given recognisable names because of some vague resemblance to creatures we know. One species is called rabbits, despite being a weird tube thing billions of times smaller than Electron and made of quantum graph species. But away from the hardness of the science, I really like the fact that Egan took the time to seed elements of humour. An example of this is with the Anachronauts, which are spacefaring humans that continue to choose travelling at relativistic speeds instead of using faster than light, so that they can hop forward through time and observe the development of civilization. As it turns out, entire planetary civilizations coordinate complicated jokes on the time travellers, leading them to think the development of the human race is even more bizarre than it actually is. Which is saying something, because it's pretty damn bizarre without having to make anything up at all. I thought this was a stroke of genius and really served as a way of adding humour. So in summary, Schild's Ladder is a masterwork of science fiction that, while not many will be able to really appreciate it in its entirety, it is accessible enough for the average reader to pick up and enjoy, and then scratch their head and wonder what the frack it was they just read. The concepts are elevated and imaginative, and the characters are relatable even in their transhumanist states, and they force us to think. With this in mind, I gave Greg Egan's Schild's Ladder 4 stars out of 5, and I would encourage every sci-fi fan to give it a go, and don't be intimidated by the menacing epithet that it's the hardest sci-fi ever. So that's it for this review. I hope you enjoyed it. I'd love to know your thoughts on Schild's Ladder in the comment section. Don't forget to like the video if you enjoyed it, and also subscribe if you haven't already for more videos from me. Until next time guys, happy reading.